So this is going to be a video on how I built these unusual hand screw clamps. They're a little different. I'm using scrap material. But these are the kits you can get. They're very inexpensive, so it makes it kind of a fun little goofy project to do with your scrap materials. If you don't, if you're like me and you store a bunch of scrap junk, wood that you kind of don't want to throw away, but you probably should. Well, now you can actually use it. Yeah, so I bought a lot of them, but half of them are for my brother. I bought four 6-inch and four 8-inch, so two for me and two for him of each size. They also have 10 and 12-inch, I believe. Now, the first thing I need to do is get inside one of these and get the little plans out, because I have no idea how big the actual blocks need to be that I'm going to glue up. So I open them up to get out the little plans, and voila, here they are. It's a little single sheet, not much to it. Again, pretty simple clamp. But these are the dimensions I need. So now that I have the dimensions I need, let's kind of dump my pile of scraps out on the table. These are all my tiny scraps. They're little pieces. What I'm going to do is laminate and make kind of a random pattern, checkerboardy, I don't know what you call it, a random pattern out of them. So I have to go through all of these and figure out kind of what I'm going to use and what I'm not going to use. And it took a little while. I sorted and kind of sorted and sorted some more. And then I sorted some more. Yeah, okay, there was a lot of sorting. Now that I've finally decided on the pieces I'm going to use, I'm taking this larger chunk of black walnut and I'm using it as a core, I guess, to build on. It'll be the main structure of the actual clamp. I'm not too worried about these clamps being perfect in strength. I'm going to use them, but I'm never going to be putting that much pressure on them. So I'm not too worried about, breakaging or cracking. But I do try and make sure any joints, as you can see how I'm laminating them, the joints don't line up with each layer or across the unit. I'm also not too worried about thicknesses. I'm trying to get close. These pieces happen to be really close in thickness. They're not perfect, but they are close. I do try and, make it close. But these will all be getting cleaned up and, shaven down as we go. So now that I got the pieces I chose, I should have probably picked up all the other scraps. But we're going to get into gluing and clamping now. So as I'm gluing this all up and spreading glue around, which is absolutely the most exciting thing you've ever seen on YouTube, I'm going to do the usual YouTube crap and ask you to like and subscribe and do all that so I can continue making these goofy little videos of goofy little things that I build in my goofy little shop. And appreciate all you people watching my little goofiness as I glue this goofy thing up. Yeah. So yeah, make sure everything's coated in a nice layer of glue. You have to make sure you really coat the meeting faces where they butt up against each other. And the end grain, I always kind of try and double the end grain. In other words, I glue both boards because end grain kind of sucks up the glue. Some people have issues getting the end grains to butt tight. I've learned you kind of just push it in there and work it with the clamp. You can use the clamp by angling it. It takes a little practice, but you can use the clamp to push the boards together as you squeeze down. I don't know how to describe it, but you angle the clamp when you go to clamp it down onto the board so it slides the two joints together. But after doing the first one, you just move on to the second one. And let it sit overnight and dry. So the next day, or in the case of this video, a couple of 3 days later, because somehow I'm an idiot and either didn't film or lost the footage from the first unclamping, you're going to unclamp them. This isn't absolutely necessary with next to the processes, but I always like to cut the extra lengths off, knowing I'm too long already, and it just kind of gets in the way with the rest of the processes of cleaning up everything. So I cut off the little really long end pieces like what are overhanging here. So once I've got it reasonable with the hand tools, I'll run it through the joiner to get a really nice mating and square face. When I do the glue up, I always try and leave one face untouched so I can use it for a reference up against the fence on the joiner. So after getting two 90-degree faces, two 90-degree to each other faces set up on the jointer, I'll bring it over to the table saw. And at the table saw, I set the fence so it's just gonna skim everything. So you find the thinnest piece you've glued on and use that for a measurement, reference, whatever, for the depth of cut. And then you just skim it off so you end up with a nice smooth face on the parallel side from what you just jointed. So after you've gotten all four sides cleaned up, two sides on the jointer and two sides on the table saw, it's ready for glue up number 2. Now some layout things with the scraps is you always try and not align joints. As you can see, I'm using wider pieces and I try and stagger the joints from the last glue up or the last couple glue ups, so you don't have joints lining up into the same spot. Just makes it stronger. In reality, it's probably not going to matter in such a small item as this, but better be safe than sorry. And it just looks better. So glue it up, clamp it up, let it sit overnight, repeat again and again and again and again. I think I did this like 6 layers. And after a few days of doing this, one after another, adding up layers, you get to run it through the jointer and the table saw for the last time, cutting it down to your final dimensions. And now that I'm done on the table saw and the jointer, I will cut it to its final length on my miter saw. Okay, that's pretty. Okay, now that everything's cut to final size, or approximately the final size, it's time to do some layout. This is a layout for where we're going to drill the pivot points and the through holes for the threaded rod to go through. Now what I'm doing here is clamping the two pieces together. It just makes it a little easier to make sure that everything lines up between the two jaws. Now there's actually a good bit of layout here. It's a little confusing. I don't want to say it's hard because it's not hard. It's just the way they have it laid out is a little odd. You've got to find the center lines and it go off. If I were to do it again, I would probably pre-measure and write down exact measurements. I also made it a little more confusing on myself because I'm adding an inch to the tail of the clamps. It's something, if you watch Taytools' little video on these clamps, they have a modification to their own clamp. It allows you to drill holes in it and use, I don't even know what kind of clamp you'd call these. They're T-clamps, uh, track clamps, whatever. They're a type of F-clamp. But it allows you to clamp them to your table saw or to a bench or something like that. But after getting all the layout done, I went around and used my center punch to punch a starter hole and get ready for, well, drilling. So yeah, I'm getting ready to drill out the pivot points where the pivot bolt, whatever you want to call it, is going to go through. Yeah. It's an odd size. It's supposed to be 1932. I bought a 14 millimeter because I didn't have a 1932, and it was easier to find a 14 millimeter than it was a 1932. So yeah, I'm using a 14 millimeter. Yeah, metric in the United States. What's up with that? Anyway, If I were to do this again, I would probably do the top bottom 15-degree angle bores first. I got some taro in the hole, which probably isn't a big deal, other than I think it bound up the pivot bolt a little bit. Nothing major, just if I were to do it again, I'd probably drill the other holes first and then these second, as it would just leave it a little cleaner in the long run. So now we got to move the drill press to 15 degrees because we're going to be making some, well, 15-degree holes in the board with the drill press. It's kind of a pain with this drill press because you got to bolt it. There's no handle. You have to get a wrench in there and tighten it up. But we got it done. So after fighting underneath the bed of the drill press to get it set to 15 degrees, I now set the height so I can now drill the 15-degree holes in the boards. I'm clamping down the piece so where it's 15 degrees, I don't want it slipping with the pressure of the drill bit going through. As you can see, it just happened there a little bit. It moved to the side. So yeah, and it's time to drill some 15-degree holes. And with a little cleanup, we're gonna drill some more holes. It's kind of just a rinse and repeat thing. And when you're done drilling them all out, you take a chisel and you turn them into slots instead of a bunch of little holes. Now, I did go back and drill out the middle in some of the slots. And after a moment of common sense, I came to the realization I should probably put them in a clamp so I don't slice my finger off with the chisel. Yeah, you can probably see where I didn't get the holes lined up as well as I'd like. The fence I was using on the drill press slipped. Oh well, it's all in good fun. They're still gonna work. So we're almost done. The last actual milling thing we have to do is cut the angle in the nose of the clamps. So as the plans say, we'll mark a 1/2 inch on the inside of the jaw, then mark 2 inches down the back legs of the top of the jaw, and then it's just connect the dots. And that will be the angle we will cut the nose of these clamps. Okay, cutting these probably wasn't the safest method I've ever used in my life, so I'm not going to get big into it, but I just used some double-sided tape and a block at 45 degrees. Double-sided both the block and the actual clamp part to each other so I could get this angle. It's kind of hard to cut it at that angle with just the miter gauge because I think it would just slip off the miter gauge, if that makes sense. So I used the 45 to get a little better angle on it. Again, not something I recommended, but it worked. So now I'm just going to do a quick test fitting, test assembly, pre-assembly, just to make sure everything works. What I'm doing here is I'm actually going to mark 2 of the nuts because these are actually left-handed threaded. So it's very confusing because they look all the same and you never know on which side is which. So by taking the red marker and marking the left-handed threaded nuts, I'll be able to tell the difference later on and not get all confused. So then you take all the right-handed threaded nuts and put them in one side, and all the left-handed threaded nuts and put them in the other side. And then you try and remember which side of the threaded rod is which, and you thread it all together. Well, it works. And the best part, time for finishing in too much sunlight. I'm just going to use mineral oil and beeswax. That's all I'm going to put on them. It's a shop tool. Yeah, I might have to re-wax them now and again, but I'm not going to get into any fancy sprays or anything that takes forever to dry. I'm just going to rub on some mineral oil, rub on a little beeswax an hour or two later, and that'll be that. It'll be fine for a shop clamp. And now for final assembly. They do look pretty good. And there you have it. Some homemade, out of scraps, kind of cool looking hand screw clamps. Plus the oak ones. I have another video where I made the handles for this, so I'll leave a link to that. Here they are in all their glory. They look great. I actually like them a lot. I did another video where I made the handles that I've added onto these. These are beautiful too. I'm really happy with this. Few edits to this. I didn't like how loose the nut was in the slots here. The 15 millimeter, I know in the video I say it's 14 millimeter, it's actually a 15 millimeter drill bit I used. It's actually smaller than the 1930 seconds, whatever it is, 1330 seconds, 1930 seconds. And yet they were still a little loose. I actually put a small piece of cardboard in the joint here and put a little wax on it, and that kind of made them a little tighter. They're still not tight in any way, shape, or form, but it made them a little less bobbly. I also went along, and if you watch Taytools' video, I made these an inch longer, like I stated in the video. I haven't drilled the holes yet. I don't know if I'm gonna, but the option's there. The other thing that they do in his video is he cuts the grooves in the jaw, and I find that very helpful, and I'm glad I did it. I have used these a couple times. As a matter of fact, I used these to drill out the handles themselves. I used the clamps, and having the notches in the jaw makes it so much better to put a round item in and use the drill press and drill down the center. It's a beautiful thing. So I highly recommend getting either a V-bit or even a not a round over, but like a bowl bit, and putting a slot in up the length of them and across like an inch in. I think I did like 3/4 of an inch in. I love these. They're awesome. They work really well. There you have it. Love these things. Make some. Do it yourself. They have other toolkits.